and welcome to the latest edition of Policy Watch. Before I introduce my guest this week, let's get a roundup of the week's top headlines. The power sector gets yet another bailout. Discoms get half their burden taken off their backs. The Apex Court clarifies that auction is not the only permissible method for natural resource allocation. Government claims this as a ruling, as a victory. Maharaja gets more money. Civil Aviation Ministry to issue non-convertible debentures worth 7,000 crore to rescue the ailing state carrier. And after declining for 3 straight months, FDI inflows show a surge, touch $1.76 billion in July. Those are the headlines in Policy Watch. This week we'll discuss the relief given to the power sector and the extremely significant Supreme Court reference on allocation of natural resources. And to give us his insights, we have KG Narendranath, a deputy editor at the Financial Express, again on the show today. Welcome to the show. So we'll go straight into our top story. Now, the Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs on Monday approved restructuring of rupees 1.9 lakh crore debt of state electricity boards. The move is aimed at benefiting the lenders and power companies in the long term. Under this most recent bailout of the power sector, 50% of the short-term outstanding liabilities would be taken over by the state governments, and the balance 50% loans would be restructured by providing moratorium on principal and best possible terms for repayments. Here are the details. Take a look.
In a move to help the near-bankrupt power distribution companies, the Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs has approved debt restructuring package of rupees 2 lakh crore for state electricity boards. Under political pressure to sell below cost and losing more than a quarter of power supply to theft and worn-out networks, the state-owned power distribution companies have been borrowing for years to fund their losses. The accumulated losses of the state discoms are estimated to be about rupees 1.9 lakh crore as on March 31, 2011 and rupees 2.46 lakh crore as on March 31, 2012. Under the scheme approved by the Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs, state government will take on half of the power distributor's short-term debt and convert it into long-term bonds. The remaining 50% of the loans will be restructured by providing a moratorium on the principal and the best possible terms for repayment. However, the government has cleared that the bailout will be performance-linked and the government will bring a law to fix responsibility on state discoms that benefit from it.
What we have said, we will have to fix the tariff every year. And there are states and states they have not fixed the tariff. But as a result, what happened? The losses will accumulate. You want to supply power, the discoms need to work.
To qualify for the debt recast, states will have to undertake milestone-linked reforms, including yearly tariff revisions, cutting down on their transmission and distribution losses, and changing managements of loss-making distribution companies. For the end user, this will mean a rise in the cost of power. With Athar Khan, Rahul Kapoor for Rajya Sabha TV.
There you go. So do you see it as a step towards tangible reform, or as some would call it, just yet another myopic bailout?
Last time, around 11 years ago, there was a similar bailout package for the power sector.
2002, 2003.
Yeah. And then also the reforms were one of the conditions. But government did not make it mandatory through any law or legal commitments. This time around, the state governments will have to necessarily legislate and commit themselves to responsibility on when it comes to implementing reforms. So that could make a difference. But I'm slightly doubtful of how many state governments will actually come forward and actually implement this.
Right.
Yeah.
We also have heard a lot about discoms and power companies wailing about how regulatory structures are not performing their job. Now, the power sector has a very strong regulatory structure in place. The regulators are independent entities, yet we have seen regulators time and again, if industry voices are to be believed, that they do not take decisive steps as and when they are required. What seems to be the reason behind it?
Because the state governments are actually not, the regulators are not really independent. In most of the cases, they work under the influence of the respective state governments.
So you're saying that political interference is a big problem?
Political interference is an issue. And also, if you see, there is actually, the Indian consumer can pay more for power. Because if you see the household expenditure increase over the last 5 years, there is around an 11% increase in the household expenditure. And the power sector cost is increased only 5%. And the overall per capita income of Indians increased by 13% in the last 5 years. That means there is a scope for Indian consumers to pay a little more for their power. Despite that, tariff revisions have not taken place over the last many years in adequate manner. In the last 2 years, there is some improvement in some cases because of pressure from the generally from the regulators. But because of the inadequate tariff revision, in the context of the fuel price increase, if you see major increases in the fuel cost, especially coal. Other fuel like gas and LNG are even costlier, and they will take time to play a larger role. So because of the stagnation in the coal sector, domestic coal production, the participation of the imported coal, the share of imported coal in the overall power production, power generation in the country has also increased.
Right.
There is a 4% increase CAGR on domestic coal production, whereas the imports are increasing by 24%. And you see from 17% now, or the overall, some 15 to 17% now, for the overall power generation, the imported coal component, it will increase to some 20% by 2017.
Right.
So you see an increased, in the coming years also, you see fuel cost to increase.
You're saying there is a case
that
to be
means there
made.
could be additional losses which come in the coming years.
You're saying there is a case to be made for higher tariffs because the consumer can pay more.
Yeah, consumer can actually pay more.
I want to come to tariffs, but a little later in this program. I want to ask you this one question first. Is there a danger, sir, of state utilities and state electricity boards to take it easy after this so-called bailout now? The Monte Singh Ahluwalia Committee in 2002 and 2003 had warned of a same moral hazard that state utilities and SEBs tend to take it easy after this because they've got another bailout. Is there a way of ensuring that this concern is sufficiently addressed, perhaps through contractual quid pro quos with the state governments?
That's what the centre is aiming at. There is also a condition that they should actually legislate, as I said earlier. But how many of the states will actually come forward and legislate? What is the compulsion on them? Is there any legal obligation on them? The centre can consider calling all state governments together and forcing them. That means they can actually make it mandatory for them to do this. How effectively the centre does it will be the actual test of this package.
So the liaison between the centre and the state government is going to be very important.
Yeah, that's true.
Now, three things. Let's look at the bigger picture, the larger picture now. The politics of free power. We all know what that is. Repressed tariffs is one more. And the patronage of power theft. Now, these are three things that people say is all because of populism and populist measures. Wouldn't you agree, Mr. Narendranath, that populism does take its toll, and it has taken its toll on the power sector and the state's ability to invest further because of this in other sectors like the social sector, the infrastructure sector as well? Instead of doing these stopgap, myopic, short-term band-aids, don't you think populism, because of populism and the power of free politics, we are, we don't get to see long-term reforms as such?
This is actually what the government is doing. Their actual intent is to reform the power sector from the generation sector to the distribution segment. Generation segment, in the recent years, we have seen some improvement through the mega power projects and other projects are also coming up. Transmission sector also has not actually, the reform has not taken place to the desired extent. Distribution segment is particularly vulnerable because there the reforms are not taking place, open access is also taking place, competition is still absent in the distribution segment. So for that is why we need substantial investment, lakhs of crores of investment in the distribution segment. In addition to improving the power generation on a rapid, accelerating the power generation. So that means these packages should be reform linked, and the centre should make sure that this time there should be another bailout package 5 years from now or 10 years from now. It can be even bigger, at a bigger cost to the exchequer.
Coming back to the tariffs, since you mentioned that, I want to ask you this. Increasing power tariffs indiscriminately surely is not the answer. Now, the SEBs and the distributors must take into concern consumer interest as well. Would you think that it must be fixed at competitive rates so as not to overburden the consumer? So
there are certain segments of the consumers, like the agricultural farm consumers. Around 22% of the total power goes to the agriculture sector. Another 22% goes to the household segment. And some 38% goes to the industrial segment. So here, there is no need to subsidize the industrial segment. There is no need to subsidize the household segment also to a large extent. agriculture consumers, if they want to give power at reduced cost to increase agricultural productivity, that can be considered. So that the overall, the power distribution companies and the DISCOMs or the power companies get their returns, reasonable returns, and the profits are ensured.
Fair point. On that note, we'll take a small break, sir, and we'll come back with our second story of the week. Don't go anywhere. Lots more to come on Policy Watch. Keep watching. Welcome back to Policy Watch. Now, in a significant development, a 5-judge bench of the Supreme Court headed by Chief Justice S.H. Kapadia ruled this week that the judgment in the 2G scam was restricted to the auction of telecom spectrum only. The court also clarified that an auction are not the only permissible method for allocating natural resources. The apex court has maintained that auction is not the absolute principle for natural resource allocation, which implies that not all natural resources may be allocated through the auction route. Significantly, also, the court has said that revenue maximization has to be secondary to public good and public interest. Mr. Narendranath, your first thoughts on the Supreme Court reference on national allocation. Do you think the judgment was along, the opinion, I beg your pardon, was along expected lines?
Whether that was mainly on the expected lines, but the court essentially said the executive has the prerogative to decide how natural resources are allocated, how the alienation of natural resources can take place from the state. And also it emphatically emphasized that the government should be, how that is exercised, the Supreme Court has the power to monitor it.
Right.
Whether the government is using this prerogative in a judicious way, in a meaningful way, or whether that leads to some endowments or larger say being given to some segment of the population, corporates or whoever it is.
They also said that that the judiciary has the power to quash any allocations that they think are arbitrary or illegal decisions.
Yeah.
So that's also very significant.
That's also very significant. That means the Supreme Court reserves its power to interfere whenever required and qualify and make a qualitative judgment on any particular way of allocation on a case-by-case basis. Whereas the prerogative to how to do auction is not the only way. There are various other ways. In certain, in the interest of the cost of the industry, in the interest of some public interest, the government can adopt other routes also. But how the government does it, is it how the discretion with the government is being used by the government.
Right.
That's what's important.
The government now claims, sir, that it has, the ruling has, the opinion of the court has vindicated its stand all along. And then we had Kapil Sibal, the telecom minister, yesterday giving a "we told you so" press conference, the triumphant press conference, if I could call it that. Does it signify, like the government is claiming, a sort of victory for the UPA?
I don't think they can call it a victory, because the other issues of coal allocation, the scandal on that, the CAG's estimates, CAG's assumptions may be, the calculations may not be accurate. But it is a fact that if the government had if the allocation was more transparent, the government would have gained more revenue, and that revenue could have been used for public good when the government is facing a fiscal deficit. These things, it is not right on the part of the government to give these things on a free, without any cost to the industry. On a special circumstances, the government may want to do it, as I said earlier, for public interest. But that cannot be the norm. The government cannot say that the Supreme Court rule has vindicated its stance.
Playing devil's advocate right now for the government side, the government has always maintained that revenue maximization cannot be the sole consideration for allocating natural resources. Now, in the case of the telecom spectrum, which the scam that saw a former telecom minister go to jail, the government's position was that the auction would have actually made call rates too high and too expensive for poor people. Interestingly though, the 2G judgment holds even now. In hindsight, sir, do you think, not counting the scam, was the first come, first served basis the right policy decision in hindsight?
No, one cannot say that. One cannot say that the first come, first served was the right decision. And also the argument that the low cost of spectrum has led to the growth of the industry, it is true to a certain extent. At the same time, government could have the overall interest. Government would have to take the fiscal interest also. it can actually get more revenue from these kind of natural resources and use it productively for other purposes, including for social sector schemes or for healthcare or education or something which is the government's obligation.
Right. Yeah. What impact, what implication will this opinion of the court have on future allocations, one, and two, other natural resources like, say, coal for that matter, or steel, or minerals, oil and gas? What are the implications that you foresee?
Even though the government has said that it has been vindicated and the auction is not the only route, it is likely that in more number of cases, government will now adopt the auction route.
The auction route.
Auction route.
And you see,
because to ensure that, to ensure transparency and to ensure that these kind of scandals don't recur, it is likely that this is actually kind of a moral pressure on the government to adopt the auction route in most number of cases. There could be exceptions, as I said, in public interest, when they can justify that, that here, at a lower cost, if you give to the particular companies or particular entities, this will be more useful for the economy, for the public at large.
Do you see this impacting also the recent challenge, the coal allocations that have been challenged? Do you think it will have any impact on that?
It can, no, this particular case will go as it is. That will not, this judgment will not have a direct impact on that, that process, because it's already an executive process, an investigation is going on. So the regulators have taken note of it, the CBC has taken note of it. So they will take care of it.
All right. On that note, we take another small break. We'll come back with the third segment after the break. Don't go anywhere. Lots more to come on Policy Watch. The Air India story is up next. Welcome back. Now, in another instance of the government pumping in more money at a distressed state-owned company, the Civil Aviation Ministry will issue non-convertible debentures, NCDs, worth rupees 7,000 crore to rescue the cash-strapped national carrier Air India. The ailing national carrier is also considering a relook at its voluntary retirement scheme, or VRS. The airline is planning to reject VRS applications of its productive employees. Policy Watch got Vijay, Mathur, aviation expert and board member of Air India and Indian Airlines, to break it down for you. Take a look.
The national carrier Air India is in news again, and to throw more light on this, I have with me Mr. Vijay Mathur, civil aviation expert and former chairman of the Airport Authority of India. Welcome to Policy Watch, sir.
Thank you.
So, Civil Aviation Minister Ajit Singh has said that the government will issue non-convertible debentures worth rupees 7,000 crore to rescue the cash-strapped airlines. Your thoughts on this?
Well, the first thing is that this is only a measure of implementing what the government had said earlier. So they had said they are going to invest 30,000 crores. This is one of the steps in that direction. So by itself, it's only implementing what they have earlier said. Many other commentators on civil aviation in India have mentioned this, and I am also very intrigued about why the government continues to throw such huge amounts of money into the airline without first asking themselves what happened to the many earlier times when they've done exactly the same thing and been promised some outcomes, none of which have happened. For example, not so long ago, Air India and Indian Airlines were merged. Now, merging two organizations is a very complex exercise. And obviously, to justify the merger, there must have been some specific outcomes with specific timelines. I don't see any evidence, at least in the public domain, on what those outcomes and timelines were and if they have been achieved or how far they are towards being achieved. In the absence of this, to continue to keep on throwing money after this is inexplicable, in my opinion. And the only thing that intrigues me is why there are so few questions of this nature in the public domain.
So you made a point that the government earlier promised in the Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs that it will pay rupees 30,000 crore. But that was subjected to some objectives which the Air India had to meet. Do you think it is able to meet those objectives?
What worries me is that I don't see any indication of what those objectives were and how far they've been met. And in the absence of that coming into the public domain, it really is difficult for me to comment. I mean, if they had stated objectives and those objectives have been met, then that should be clearly stated. The fact that it isn't being stated leads to the suspicion that nothing has happened that should have happened. The other issue is that in all of this, we need much more acceptance of the fact that if the merger is to succeed, they need to get rid of staff, they need to restructure, and given that that is politically very difficult, I would imagine that we should acknowledge that the merger was not a success and we should demerge it, because each airline had its own culture. And when you merge airlines, to get cultures merged, to get pilot associations merged, to get cabin crew unions merged, is a very complex task. And I have not yet understood what the benefits were going to be when it was acknowledged that it's very difficult to get rid of 5,000, 6,000 people in the interests of efficiency.
Air India is also re-looking into its voluntary retirement scheme, and it is planning to reject applications, VRS applications of its productive employees. Is this a necessary step?
Well, the trouble with VRS, as I have found in my own experience, is that you tend to lose your best people. The best people are the ones who are frustrated by the lack of career development. They recognize the value of what they do for the airline, and there are many takers for such people. So the minute you give them a VRS, you lose absolutely the cream. By and large, you lose the cream of your organization. What you're left with is the guys who should really be taking VRS, who are wise enough to know that they wouldn't take it ever. The last point I just wanted to make is that whatever I have said has been based on what is available in the public domain. And my bottom line is that we need to be given far more facts and figures in the public domain so that one can come to a genuine judgment and the realism of this investment.
Thank you so much, sir, for talking to Policy Watch. That was Mr. Vijay Mathur, who said that although the government is investing in the airlines, but what about the objectives which the Air India had to meet? He also said that points should come in the public domain for a legitimate judgment on it. That's all I have for now. Back to you in the studio.
Rahul Kapoor with that story. Now, do you think 7,000 crore worth in non-convertible debentures is throwing good money after bad, like Mr. Mathur seems to suggest?
You know, as he said, there is no transparency on what the plan is, how the Air India will improve its the operational systems, management systems. Even the airline industry globally is in a crisis. Even in other private companies are also in a crisis. So in this situation, what role the government wants the Air India to play? If he wants to be one of the many players, that is fair and good. But the point is that then the government should be able to clearly to ensure that the Air India is able to use these resources, the additional resources from the exchequer, for improving its performance and coming out of the crisis. If it is not that, so if that is not the case, then this is of course throwing good money into
There could be two scenarios that I want to ask you. One is that is the government too immersed in Air India now? It's gone too far in. It's a matter of prestige that they can't really back out and they have to keep throwing money at it. The number two scenario is, has the time come for Air India to be privatized? Your opinion on that?
You know, as I said earlier, whether Air India should be privatized or not, the government can decide. But you should not be throwing good money into Air India, infuse more funds into the company without actually researching it and making it able to compete in a commercial world.
Right.
For that, whatever is required, government should do if it wants to don't privatize Air India. Otherwise, you can opt for privatization.
Right.
And Air India is one of the cases. There are many other PSUs where the researching is not happening to the desired extent. And there's a system of a board for reconstruction of PSUs where the government is not acting fast enough. And the issue of PSU sickness is a larger issue. Air India is a bigger company, it's an airline company, that is why it's in focus. There are many other PSUs, smaller PSUs, which are not able to compete in a commercial world, but the government is continuing to infuse funds in them in a gradual fashion and sometimes in lump sum also.
Right. On that note, Mr. Narendranath, we thank you very much for coming on Policy Watch again this week. That was KG Narendranath, a deputy editor of the Financial Express, with his views on our three top stories. The top story this week was the power sector bailout. Now, DISCOMs have got half of their burden, that's That's about 1.9 lakh crore rupees that the government will take care of now. It begs the question whether it's a bailout, just a bailout, or a step towards tangible reform. Now, our guest this week thought that there is a case to be made for tariff revisions because the consumer can pay more tariff. That's something the government can look at. The second story on Policy Watch this week was the very significant opinion of the Supreme Court on the clarification that they issued on how natural resources, the only method is not auction, and they said other methods can also be used. This definitely strengthens the government position. It might just help the government to counter the opposition charges of corruption. But for the time being, right now as we see it, auctions are not just the only permissible method for allocation of resources, of natural resources. Third story, of course, was more money being pumped into Air India. Like our guest, Mr. Mathur, said, it could be perhaps a case, one can't help but wonder that throwing good money after bad, 7,000 crores to be infused through non-convertible debentures. We'll have to wait and see what the plan is that the government has in mind for Air India, and like our guest in the studio said, other PSUs as well. That's all the time we have on Policy Watch this week. Athar Khan saying goodbye, good night, and thank you for watching.